Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us here at the closing session. Glad to have you all back. My name's Lisa Regala. I'm going to be one of the moderators for this session, and I'm joined by Rebecca Teasdale, who you might remember from one of the keynote presentations. So she's going to be co-facilitating this closing session with me. The purpose of this session is to give us some time to reflect on the things that we heard and learned today, and maybe even help fill in some gaps if you have a little bit of FOMO because you might have missed out on some sessions. We had to make a choice a couple times during those breakout sessions, right? So there were some sessions you weren't able to attend. And I don't know about you, but it was a lot of information. My head is spinning a little bit. And so we want to give some time to help make those connections in our brains from the different sessions that we heard. And so to do that, we're going to engage in a making activity. This is a library makerspace showcase. We're going to engage in a making activity of our own. It's going to be messy, like all good maker things are, so bear with us today. But we set up a Miro board that has 4 different categories. And Emily, would you mind just giving like a quick show of the full board? So what we've been doing behind the scenes as these sessions were going on today is we have made some notes. All of our amazing moderators have been like taking notes after their sessions and thinking about what they heard in terms of these categories. The strengths that we've seen in the current body of research that's out there, the gaps in the current research, any really practical tips and resources that we learned from those sessions. And then the final one is next steps and future opportunities. And so the colors actually all coincide with a different session. So the bright blue is things that we heard in the keynote, and the purple color is what came out of the accessibility breakout sessions, for example. So at that point, you don't have to worry about in your head, but just so you know, that's what all the colors are for. But how we are going to run this is we're going to go section by section in this board. We'll give you a minute to read what all of our moderators and us wrote in that section. And then Rebecca and myself will give a quick little overview of what we saw from those post-its, but we want to spend time hearing from all of you about what things you think we missed in there. If there's resources or post-its that need a little tweaking and rewording in there, and any other questions and thoughts that come up as you're sort of distilling now all of the sessions you heard, but in these new categories. So we're going to give it a try. Please give us feedback along the way too, but that's our plan. We will also, after we give our little overview, have time that you can write in the chat, of course, at any point in time, but we'll also give you a moment to unmute, raise your hand so that you can speak freely during this. We want this to be an interactive session for sure. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca first, who's going to take us through the strengths of current research.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa. My name again is Rebecca Teasdale. Excited to be here in our closing session. Thank you, Emily, for showing the board. So what we're going to do is Emily has zoomed in on the strengths of current research section of our Miro board. And so we're just going to give you a few minutes to kind of read the post-its that our moderators added throughout the day and kind of thinking about the full body of research that was discussed today and what stands out as some of the strengths and the real depth of knowledge that we have. So I'm going to actually just give us a few minutes of silence to kind of read through that and reflect, and then I'm going to share some of my takeaways as I have read through those and distilled those ideas. All right. I know there's a lot there, and it's hard since we can't see you all to know kind of how it's going looking through. But I was really struck in looking at these post-its and just kind of reflecting on our day together, how much the research has really grown along with maker services and maker programs in libraries. So, those of us that have been around for a while, remember in the bad old days at the beginning when researchers were really trying to help figure out like what is this maker phenomenon, really trying to document what these spaces were, what was happening in them. And it was really exciting today to see how far we've come and how much we've learned over the years. Kyung-Won started us out with a little bit of history about these services and libraries. And I can sort of see throughout the day how our knowledge base has grown as well, that we're really deepening our understanding of who is in our spaces, what they're doing, and why. The research has, reaches across different types of libraries. So we had research today from academic libraries and public libraries and school libraries, as well as outside of library walls. So thinking about more mobile making opportunities. And we also saw presentations from all over the country. I know we also had some folks, some international guests and, people in our community as well today. And so I'm curious about research beyond our national borders as well. One of the real strengths that I saw, and the post-its are kind of grouped. I tried to group them according to themes that probably won't make sense to any of you, but this is part of our messy making that Lisa and I are doing. One of the things that really stood out to me is that we also now have this research base that's connecting library makerspaces to the larger LAS profession, right? So research is really helping us to document and to represent those values of library and information science more broadly and demonstrate the value of makerspaces to the field, right? I think Kyung-Won started us off by saying like this isn't some kind of like marginal on the side activity anymore. This is becoming, the heart, part of the heart and soul of what we do. I was also really excited and inspired by the way that researchers and all of you here were connecting the making activities with different disciplines, particularly those of you in schools and universities. So, we often maybe think about making in terms of tech and engineering. We're doing more and more in the field of arts. And then I was really hearing cool stuff about the humanities now as well, things like literature. So that was really exciting for me. And also, really thinking about the difference that this makes in student learning. So some of the sessions about student learning outcomes and how we're able to connect what people are doing in makerspaces to broader educational goals and aims. Another thing that really struck me, and this was a quote that I probably got wrong, but one of the presenters talked about being excited that the showcase was moving beyond the technology itself, that we were talking about the technology, certainly, which was great, but also moving beyond that. And so I was excited as well to see us really investigating the human experiences in our spaces. And doing so in very nuanced and interesting ways, right? So not looking at makers as monolith, as kind of one group of people, but really understanding the differences in makers' experiences and specifically unpacking experiences of folks who have been marginalized or minoritized in making environments, such as people with disabilities. Really great work from Maggie this morning, looking at first-time visitors. And I also heard people talking about the importance of drawing on our personal identities and our lived experiences to inform research as well. We also saw research that was really digging into things like belonging, empowerment, self-efficacy, values. So really, including the technology and so much more. And then I think the final thing that I want to highlight is kind of about our research methods themselves. So I was excited to see how the research is increasingly responsive to the sensory rich nature of these spaces, right? So we heard people talking about documenting how makerspaces look and sound and smell. We had research about virtual reality. There was a session about gathering data using photo surveys and gathering data using observations and sort of watching what was happening. And I think that's really important. And it's really stretched my thinking and made me really, kind of challenge myself about how I can contribute to that base or draw on that base, that we're starting to understand our maker spaces as these multi-sensory places and have that reflected in our research as well. So those were my sort of reflections and takeaways. I know that Lisa has been keeping an eye on the chat in case we have good themes or questions that we want to draw out there. So Lisa, should we hand it to you or open it up to the group? What do we
Yeah,
think?
let's open it up to the group. We had one comment. I'll let you know, Rebecca, that I did add to your next section in gaps that came up. So there's a new post-it there about making an under-resource library. So, but
Awesome.
no questions so far in the chat, so we can open it up.
Awesome, that's great. Okay. So yeah, so one of the things we're going to do our best to do is to add your post-its as people in the community are giving input. And so you should hopefully be seeing those pop in as well. So at this point, we want to open it up. We'll ask folks to raise your hands so that we can just make sure that we see who wants to speak and who has something to share. You're welcome to also keep adding things in the chat. But to share any takeaways that you have about the strengths of the current research, we would love to hear your reflections.
I think the other comment, Rebecca, while people are still thinking, and feel free to use the hand raising tool if you want to speak, was just that use of VR. I mean, that was one of the comments in the chat about how exciting that is. It's just kind of a tool to move away from a text-based research.
Yeah, that was really exciting. And actually in the presentations today too, I loved how much folks incorporated QR codes and things so that we could actually like dip into your worlds, see your spaces. I had a really great time exploring Maggie's virtual space as well. And I saw people in the chat, asking for the link again and that sort of thing so that they could continue to explore. So I think the research is really great. And then I also think the way that we are communicating with one another and sharing that research as well. We'll take another minute for folks that want to add something about strengths of current research. Otherwise, I can move into some ideas about gaps, and then we can kind of open it up for a general conversation about like the current state of research, strengths and gaps, and questions about the research. Yeah, so I see a comment from Ashley in the chat about considering community values and desires and needs is great, that makerspaces will not be the same in each community. I heard so many of the presenters today talking about that and really talking about, I can't remember now which, I heard someone specifically say, like, I'm not going to give you, a bunch of advice about what you should do. Maybe that was Dr. Mello as well. Because we're all different, our communities are different, and we're responding to different needs and different priorities, which I really appreciate. Um, yeah, so Max had a comment in the chat that really struck me as well, is that I was a librarian. I'm still, once a librarian, always a librarian, right? So I am definitely a librarian at heart. I worked in public libraries for 15 years. And part of why I wanted to do research was to discover things and document things that I was experiencing and put names and put systematic evidence to things that we encounter in practice. And so some things that are intuitive as practitioners, that folks have different goals, that intimidation factor that people feel in the makerspaces, and having that substantiated by research, I think is really powerful for our field and gives us an evidence base and a way of communicating with funders, with leaders, with community members. So I think that that is really powerful and something that's really exciting about our growing research base. I see a comment in the chat about a session about how we measure success, values-based assessment. I was really sorry to miss that. I was super excited about that too. That is like top of my playlist when the recordings come out. So I'm really looking forward to catching up on that one as well. And then I also see something in the chat about integrating vintage technology with emerging tech. I agree. That was super illuminating. If anyone missed that session, that was some really exciting work that I won't even be able to represent because it's not my area of work at all. I highly recommend watching that video to think about what technologies we're incorporating into these spaces and how to bridge some of those vintage or older technologies with some of the newer and more emerging technologies. Um, I think let's go ahead and shift into gaps a little bit. Emily, if you can move our board so folks can see gaps in the research. And I can see that Lisa is actively, oh, that's so cool. I can actually see what's being added in real time. So that kind of light, the lightest blue color are things that are coming from your conversation, our conversation in real time. So you'll see those kind of populating as we're talking. But again, I'm just going to give you a minute to take a look at what's on there, reflect a moment, and then I'll share some of my takeaways and see what else you all, what your synthesis looks like as well. All right. I think, so for me, there were several things that really struck me about gaps in the current research. And the first one was like top of the morning. My first takeaway is that we don't have a common definition of a makerspace, right? And so I kind of had that in the back of my mind all day and thinking about like, what is a makerspace? What is making in libraries? Because we have this incredible diversity and richness in what we're all doing in our libraries. And so what I found really interesting is that each definition that I sort of held in my mind throughout the day was stretched and challenged by presentations that I attended, right? So each time that I would think, okay, it's this, it's that, I would hear something else that you all are studying or you all are doing in your libraries that would help me think more expansively and more broadly. So I really appreciated that. And thought that that was a really powerful way to start the day and to kind of frame my own thinking. And then it kept happening, right? It kept carrying on this conversation about clarifying our terminology. So thinking about makerspaces being empowering, there was one of the sessions talked about like, well, what do we even mean by that? What's empowerment? What's power? What does that mean? Thinking about the different ways that we think about values also requires some redefining. I see some notes going in the chat, which is awesome. Keep it coming. And one of the ones that jumped out at me was on my list as well was needing some more research about LIS education for makerspace work. That is one that really kind of resonated across multiple sessions in thinking about really needing to understand how we're preparing people for this kind of work, both in like pre-service, graduate education, maybe undergraduate education, and then also in our workplaces, right? How do we train librarians and library staff? How do we support um, library staff? There has been, library staff have been involved in research forever. A lot of times we're gathering data from library staff about what's going on in the maker spaces. But what I noticed was that we're often asking them about the experiences of makers, or we're asking them about the making activities rather than, or maybe there's more space where we could also be asking more about their day-to-day work, right? Their career pathways, their experiences, their challenges. One of the lightning talks that I got to hear that was in that vein was kind of sharing a case study about how programming ideas and technology projects could be shared and replicated across contexts, and making those feasible for other people. And so I thought, well, yeah, like more case studies about how we take the great work we're doing and share it among all of us. Because that's one of my favorite things about this field and this profession in LAS is, is this sharing and connection among us. I was also struck by the conversation around disability access and experiences of youth with disabilities and the need for more research in this area. And I would also then build on that more research about other makers who are minoritized or marginalized in making environments. Kind of building on the conversation about belonging made me wonder about research about what is othering in these environments, right? And see some opportunities there. I was also wanting to think with all of you about what AI means for all of this. I was really curious about how AI powered design tools or bots might support making or constrain making or just sort of change the landscape. I don't know much about that. um, and then I was also really struck, because of this conversation about the multisensory nature of makerspaces. It made me really wonder about the need to be more visual and interactive in our dissemination, right? And so one of the speakers talked about that, being able to do a conference paper that was a lot more visual than usual. And so thinking about gaps, maybe not in the research itself, but in how we talk about it and how we share it to really be congruent with the environments that we're studying. So that's kind of my brain dump about gaps. I've seen the chat going and I did not catch much of it. So I'm going to ask Lisa if there's things there that we want to call out and want to invite people to raise your hands and come off mute as well.
Yes, definitely invite folks to do that. I've been adding a little bit, I think, to future opportunities. I mean, obviously there's some overlap in these categories, but there were some questions um, about how state libraries can help,
Mm.
about how library makerspaces might help meet sustainability and freedom of information values. Um, and I think you saw the other post-its I had added about tribal libraries and
Mhm.
how to learn from that and bringing those cultural arts and crafts to our other spaces. So there's a lot of great ideas and a lot of conversations around some of those topics, and I've been trying to add the post-its as we go, but
Oh,
would
this
love.
is great. This is great. I also just saw something about public libraries partnering with school libraries. Um, and it made me realize too, one thing I would love to see more research about is those kind of partnerships and sort of how libraries are working with other institutions, either other libraries or community-based maker spaces. Community clubs and organizations. There's so many makers in our world, and I'm really curious about the intersections and sort of where, how libraries are connecting or not connecting, how we are supporting one another. I think would be really a really rich area for future research as well. Yeah, Benjamin says partnerships are crucial. Yeah, or critical, sorry. Yeah, I completely agree. And I see it, right? When I do research with libraries and I get to visit different communities, I see the great outreach and the great partnerships that libraries are doing. And today it just reflected on, wow, like we need to know more about that and have research in that area to support that work. So we've talked about strengths in the research base and gaps. Is there anything else that people want to chime in with about the kind of the research body, the body of research, the base? Oh, Juliana has a hand raised. Awesome. If you want to come off mute and share your thoughts, that'd be great. While Juliana's doing that, I also wanted, oh, you can't unmute yourself. Emily, can you help with that? I also wanted to give a shout out. I see Jill Connors Joyner is here, which is awesome, from IMLS, and is sharing some really great resources in the chat. So thank you for that. Great to see you here. Host is not allowing to come off mute. So I know our IT folks will work on that and
Hi,
make
can you hear me okay?
awesome.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Whew, wow.
Love
Um, Wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate the post-it note on dispositions of a maker and how to make it part of the academic conversation. So I'm actually new to my role as an experiential learning librarian, so new to library makerspaces and specifically academic libraries, but I've been an instructional librarian for many, many years. So I'm really familiar with ACRL's, information literacy framework that does have designated dispositions. So I was actually very surprised to see that there weren't already dispositions of a maker. So that was something that I think really I'm thinking a lot about. And I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts on this because I get to me, this is such a crucial piece of what are we looking for success in these spaces and success for our learners and kind of being able to also assess how are we identifying that if we can't see indicators of these dispositions potentially, right? Oh, I think now you're muted.
Oh my gosh, it wouldn't be a Zoom conference if we weren't having muting problems. That is such a great point. I'm really glad you brought that out because when I saw that posted, I added that also to my playlist because I didn't get to hear that talk. So I'm really excited to learn more about that and yeah, looking forward to learning about those dispositions as well. All right, I see. Yeah, there's so much going on in the chat, but I want to be mindful of time. And so I think at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa, who is going to take us to the next section on the Miro board, which is about practical tips and resources. And that is an amazing section. It is like full of incredible things. So this is going to be really fun to dig into.
Thanks, Rebecca. Yes. So I am not a researcher. I'm coming at this from the more, research to practice side. And so I was really excited in listening to all these talks. Obviously, there's a lot that we can gain from research, but it was so exciting to hear all of these different practical tips and resources that were being gleaned and from all of these different presentations. So I'm super excited that this square is bursting at the seams, and I hope that we can add more. So what I would invite you to do, as you've been doing already in the chat as I'm talking through this, is if there are other resources you think we should know about, to please add them in the chat and we'll make sure that they're added to the board. So I'll give you a minute to read what's here, but if other things come to mind, please feel free to put them in the chat and then we'll do a discussion. So we'll dive in here. Obviously, you might still need a few minutes to keep reading while we talk, but Matt, you've been patiently having your hand raised, so I'll go to you first. Feel free if you have a question or addition.
Hey y'all. Um, this is an awesome group. I'm so happy to be part of this, to be able to talking with y'all today. Um, uh, we have a little library makerspace group here in Michigan, and we're big on not reinventing the wheel, but happy to make one if necessary. In this vein, I was wondering if, as a group, we know of any job skills repository for either technical or soft skills that would be helpful to us and other makerspace professionals. Thank you.
A job skills repository. Um, I didn't hear of one today. If anyone knows of one, please feel free to put it in the chat or unmute. I know, job skills and thinking about, how we're interviewing for these positions, what kind of job postings come up in some of these other toolkits and resources that are here, but I don't know of a specific list. Oh, someone might have put one in there, which is great for academic libraries. If anyone has resources, feel free, or other questions. I'll keep talking about some of the other ones I saw here. Um, I know we heard in the keynote that we heard a lot about first-time users in the makerspaces, which I thought was really a lovely way to think about it and what their impression is, just even approaching the threshold, yet alone crossing the threshold and entering the space. And there were some great practical tips in that keynote session about these small sorts of changes that you could do that really, really made a big difference, right? And how people felt about entering a space, about using a particular piece of equipment or material in the space. And it's always great to see when a small change, right, can make such a big difference. We heard a lot, and we were hearing all these conversations in the chat about being intentional to gather community values, this sort of like localized assessment, localized values coming out again, and that came up in these practical tips and resources. And I think it was in Rebecca's talk where we learned about having this balance of using the word learning, that we have to recognize that a lot of us in this library space, we want everyone to come in and learn, right? But that might be the intention of those that are entering that space and the patrons that are coming in. And so just kind of keeping all these different seesaw balances in mind as we're developing programming and assessments for that programming. So there's a whole section here of these purple Post-its that came out of really practical tips on that breakout session on accessibility. And I would highly encourage folks to add those to their playlist. I'm probably going to, even though I was there, go back and listen to some of them. A lot of great research, but a lot of really wonderful tips. Like we heard someone mention, like, thanks about mentioning about ventilation and things, I hadn't even thought about air filtration, right? As one of those
I
accessibility.
forgot he was gonna have to clean around the toilet before he did activities today.
Oh, someone's unmuted, but we might need to mute them. Okay. Anyway, yeah, so there's a lot of great tips there. We had just in that kind of bottom right corner, I sort of put a bunch of just URLs, and folks mentioned about the Play Make Learn conference coming up this summer, just different ideas and resources that came up that folks were interested in sharing. I'm one of the project directors for librarymakers.org, so I encourage you to check that resource out. Anyway, a lot of these great, and I hope we'll get more in the chat. I see Rebecca's adding quite a few, so that's great that there's a lot of great things out there, right? And part of the purpose of today is that we all share. We don't need to, like Matt said, we don't need to recreate the wheel, right? We want to be sharing and learning from one another. There were definitely some resources on assessment between the observation deck toolkit. There was a lot of excitement in our breakout session around that, about these frameworks and around maker competencies that could be used to help assess maker learning. So there are things out there, and it's really exciting to see that a lot of those came up in these sessions. And we had some really specific sessions focused on, like, engineering, for example, engineering in rural environments, thinking about family making and how, like we heard with the VR, these kind of unique ways that we could reach families. So that project was talking about, really doing this virtually. How can we reach and make these programs more accessible to families if we put them online? Is that a way to do it? As well as this connected spaces and reach projector. There were some neat technologies being used to help people connect, to help share what they're working on live with others across town, across a library, or across the world, right? So there were some really neat technologies that were being used and some tools and resources to help us stay connected, learn from one another, and I thought that was all very, very exciting as well. I'm seeing some different tools and things popping up in the chat. Rebecca, anything? I haven't been able to keep up. Anything you want to add? Are you seeing any trends happening in the chat?
Yeah, some really great tools that I've been trying to add, including links to um, now I can't even remember either. There's been so many. The Association of Creative Technologies in Academic Libraries added a link to that. The Making in School and Public Libraries downloadable book has been added. PLIX, the Public Library Innovation Exchange. So I'm just kind of popping all these on there and doing my best to keep this readable. We are going to share the Miro board so that you'll have, you'll be able to see all this. So it's getting so full that I know it's hard to read, so appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And I just see lots of good um, questions about, folks wanting to do maker events and looking for resources on that. I bet there's a resource out there, right? I think it's kind of like what we're discovering from this. There are a lot of great things, and I'm just so thankful to have this space where we're able to share some of this and make everyone aware of these. Oh, and I think Benjamin commented a bit on some of those staff skills that Matt was asking about. So that's great. I know in the one of the resources on here is the Makers in the Library Toolkit. And we do have a section on there about job descriptions, and we link to a Google folder of different job postings and job descriptions, which embed some of those competencies in there. And so I'm happy to follow up and send like the specific link to that folder so you don't have to do digging with anyone that's interested. That might be helpful. Oh yeah, and some other great accessibility tips coming up too. I just saw Rebecca, you added that. Thank you. I will also shameless plug because Library Makers, if you're not aware, I encourage you to join, is a free platform. It's sponsored and funded by IMLS, and it's a community for anyone that is part of a library makerspace or cares about library makerspaces to join and ask some of these questions too. It kind of works like a Facebook feed, right? Where you can post a question, folks will give responses. We have about 1,600 members now. So folks are chiming in, and it could be a way to also, again, continue these conversations on that space, and I'll post some of these resources, get ideas for other things. Even if there's not a resource available, someone might say, hey, I've done this, check this out. Oh, and thanks for some kudos there for library makers in the chat. All right, great. I think for sake of time, we'll move on to our last category, which is the future. Where are we going? Some takeaways. We made some very loose categories here, which I'm not sure all of these post-its very cleanly fit into. But we did our best in our maker way here. From just, listening to all of these sessions and hearing some of the connections and things that were happening. And so in that kind of lime green color are those categories. One, oh, sorry, I forgot. I want to give you all a minute to read them for yourselves first. So take a minute to read this slide, and then I'll continue talking. Okay, so again, feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand if you have a question as we go along here too. But the three general categories we set up was this idea of research practice partnerships, because we heard a lot about, you know, the vintage tech that came up in the chats a bit, and it came up in here, to how do we incorporate it? How are we going to research that piece? So there's interest from the library standpoint, and many of you are doing this already, but how do we sort of marry that with researchers and get some research projects along those lines as well? um, to bridge information science, including making and related fields. Ideas around sustainability that came up in Kangwan's talk at the start. Sustainability, I mean, on the ground, library makers makerspace staff are thinking about that all the time, right? How do we keep these spaces going and current and relevant to the community they serve? But how we also partnering that with research activities that are going to help us learn key things about sustainability that we can then put back into practice in the library. Using research for decision making or service model development. So all these different areas where we can think more about how we can more closely tie, these day-to-day challenges and opportunities that are happening in library makerspaces with research projects that could help further that learning and growth in those areas. A second bucket, which I kind of put in that left side of the board, were approaches for gathering and incorporating feedback into makerspaces. We had a whole breakout session about assessment, but we heard about it in other sessions as well. Maker literacy frameworks and this idea of building local assessments that aren't necessarily comparative. So how are we looking really locally at what's happening at a particular library and not worrying about an assessment or data collection that might compare what's happening in, Sacramento, California to what's happening in Skokie, Illinois, right? And so just thinking about these different kinds of assessment tools and how we're gathering feedback and then how we're using that to make changes in the library. I know one of the sessions that I attended, there was a lot of interest in thinking about these current assessment tools that we already have, but how they could be applied to measure not just what's happening within the makerspace itself, but looking at community outcomes. And so Kongwan talks a lot about that in her talks that, we focus a lot about what's happening in the space, but what does that impact on the community at large? And so there were some aha moments in there, which I think lead to some future opportunities of like, hey, we have these tools already. Can they also be applied to look at these other avenues like community-based outcomes of library makerspaces? And then my bottom right category was about supporting library staff in applying and building on research in their spaces. And so, you know, how do we support what's happening there? That became out as staff training. There were a lot of questions about staff training, particularly for libraries that don't have dedicated staff to their library maker spaces. Is there a repository for open curricula? We just heard now in the chat about a repository for job skills as well. We had all those great tips from the sessions on accessibility, but there were questions about, hey, is there just one place that I can go to where I can learn about specific tools and materials that are designed for accessibility that I could purchase for my space, right? So just having these sort of collections and repositories of information that could really help support taking all this great research that we learn and all the tips that we learn and really putting it into practice. Opportunities to share projects and expertise across all of our sites because everyone's doing really amazing things and we want to be able to share that, and through a lot of technology means we heard about in the sessions. I'm noticing a lot going on in the chat, so I want to pause for a minute and see, Rebecca, is there anything else we should be focusing on?
Yeah, one of the great comments that came up earlier that I added here was a suggestion to develop a degree based on making, running, maintaining makerspaces along with library and information technology. So there was enthusiasm about that in the chat, and so I've added that to the board. There was also a question about whether from the showcase today, there would be a place with all of this great resources. And so I mentioned that we're going to post the materials on our website, but there was conversation about like maybe we need a research repository so where people can find stuff. So I'm going to add that right now before our very eyes.
Ooh, I know, it's so great. I did see that post that you added, but my glasses aren't strong enough. I couldn't read that one. So thank you
Yeah,
for bringing that one up. I'm seeing a um, chat here from Benjamin about supporting our ESL community as well, as another aspect of accessibility. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes, it's another layer, right, of accessibility is the multilingual piece. Feel free again to raise your hand if you have any other last comments and questions too. We'll have a few more minutes to be kind of wrapping up um, our time here before we turn it over to close the whole session. So if you have a question, now's your chance.
I just saw a comment in the chat about kind of following up on that about supporting folks who speak multiple languages, about having examples or instructions with pictures, things like that. So I'll add that in the chat as well, kind of how we might share resources in multiple languages or share resources that don't require a lot of words to provide support.
There's an interesting comment James put in there too. I'm curious to hear others comment and chime in on that. We're all for continuing education, but wondering how many people, I'm assuming you mean that work in a library do this because you don't need a degree. Is that what you mean, James? I'm not sure if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I love to have some clarification and hear what others have to say to that comment. Because I know many library staff do have a degree, but it might be a
Yeah, so I think in terms of like a makerspace specific degree, that was something that I was kind of considering. Like, also, I don't have a library degree, and so something that drew me to this field was that it was an area that I could explore, and it was an area that I could kind of expand my skill set, but I wouldn't need to necessarily get a library degree, so to speak.
Thank you for clarifying. And I think in some cases too, it doesn't even have to be a formal degree, right? But like we've learned about different maker certificate programs and things like that too, right? Where you could do some continuing education, but it's not even necessarily a degree. I think this ties to the job skills question too that Matt was asking as well. Yeah, I'm seeing some folks saying like their work history is what got them to the position, not a particular degree. So many different tracks, right, to become a librarian, and there is that sort of formal education track, but it is open. It goes to the whole general accessibility of libraries, right, and how exciting it is and why it's such a great place for making accessibility and who's coming in the door and the heterogeneity of all the people that come in and the welcoming to that, and also the welcoming to the different types of staff, right, that are there. I'm seeing a lot of folks agreeing with you, James. Thank you for bringing that up. Is there any other new questions, Rebecca, do you think we should address?
I think we've covered it. There's still great conversation and people connecting around resources, which I think we should keep going with that, which is great. But yeah, I think we've synthesized.
Thanks for bearing with us. And that was our little experiment here. I hope you found this helpful. And yeah, thanks for being here. I'm going to turn it over to Kongwan to wrap it up for the day.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Rebecca. This is wonderful session. So bear with me. I'm trying to share my slides again. Let's see. Do you see my slide?
Not yet.
Okay. So it says it's screen sharing has failed to start. Okay, let me. The tech team, do you know, do I have the ability to share the screen today in this session? Here we go. Okay, thanks so much again, Lisa and Rebecca, for facilitating this closing session and help us reflect on and synthesize what we've learned throughout the day. And thank you to everyone for being here to learn and celebrate with us. Our next step is to work on uploading and sharing the recordings of the talks as well as the presentation materials that each speaker is willing to share on the project website. So please stay tuned. And as I mentioned in the opening session this morning, this research showcase is part of the National Forum funded by IMLS. And our next phase will be a series of listening sessions to envision and plan the future of library makerspaces, not necessarily about research, but the overall field of library makerspaces. So we have 3 identical 1-hour Zoom sessions coming up in March. So everyone is welcome to join one of those listening and feedback sessions. And we'll be exploring 4 areas together: values, vision, priority, and resources. We'll also be gathering input asynchronously while we will be synthesizing and documenting this great showcase. So again, please stay tuned. All of you who registered for this event will receive a follow-up thank you message with information about the upcoming sessions and the project website update. Thanks again, and it's been an amazing day, and I hope you've made a great connections and takeaways today. So yeah, so thank you everyone, and bye now, and let's stay connected.